Hey guys, it's Ian at SSA 1000 Cars, and today I want to talk about our two cars, the 675 LT McLaren and the 911 GT3 second series of the 992. Now, I'm going to focus a little bit on the differences between the supercar, which this clearly is, and the high-level sports car, which is the category I put the GT3 into. And I'm just going to cover over the headings as I see them in terms of where the differences are. Now, obviously, at the bottom end supercar and at the top end sports car, the levels get blurred slightly. So something like a 911 Turbo S has very, very close performance to a lower end supercar. But in essence, what are the differences? So the first difference I want to talk about is exclusivity. They made 500 coupe 675 LTs and they made 500 Spiders. In essence, worldwide we have 1,000 of these cars, so you can drive this for months on end and you never see another 675 LT. And I think exclusivity is part of the supercar genre, whereas the GT3, they made into the thousands, probably 3,000 or 4,000. I know they made more of the 991 second series to the first series. I'd estimate above 3,000 probably. And the other thing about the GT3 is, even although that's not a lot of cars, the point is that the GT3 is based on the 911. So to a lot of people, when they see this car drive past, they think of it as a 911, and the 911 is, I won't say it's a common sight because it certainly isn't, but it's not particularly exclusive. And I think the GT3 is more for those people that really know their cars than it is for your average bystander. Looks. Now, looks are very subjective. So at the end of the day, you might actually prefer the looks of the GT3, and I do think this particular version is really the culmination of all the versions before. I think they've got the styling absolutely perfect, but it's still a sort of a sports car 2+2, which is what the 911 Porsche is. Whereas here we have a mid-engine supercar, 2 seats, never designed to have any more than 2 seats, and it's a carbon tub, which is acknowledged to be the lightest and strongest tubular chassis available on a car. And most hypercars have a carbon chassis. McLaren were the people that brought this into the supercar, and again with their 570S into the top flight sports car series. So I just think that the 675 looks more supercar than the GT3, and I think it's difficult to explain, but it's down to dramatic looks in a way. We have the glass cover on the engine, so you can see straight through to the mid-engine, see where it is. It's clothed in carbon fibre. We have the huge grey air intakes at the sides, smaller ones on the skirts. It just lends a certain dramaticism to the car itself. And this is all clothed in carbon fibre, and the side skirts are clothed in carbon fibre, because of course this is a twin turbo and you need the maximum amount of air into the engine, which is why the side intakes are so big. But they offer drama which you simply don't have on the GT3. Though, having said that, on the 570S McLaren you do have air intakes on the side, but they're not as dramatic. Here, of course, we do have the air intakes in the hood of the engine compartment. Of course, the engine in a 911 GT3 is at the back of the car, as with all 911s. But no air intakes at the side. It's obviously very smooth down the side. We do have the side skirts, but they're not carbon fibre. And I think overall, it's just not so dramatic. On the McLaren 675, you have the high level exhaust. I think they lend a certain amount of drama, and below that you have the carbon fibre rear bumper and rear diffuser, which again I think is just supercar. Whereas on the GT3 have a lot of air intakes at the back of the car, which also lend drama, but not quite in the same way. So I think 675 has more drama than the Porsche, but that is not to say that this car isn't a very good looking car, because personally I think it is. Talk about performance. Now this is I alluded to earlier in the video, is quite difficult to do, because quite often these top level sports machines are unbelievably fast. I mean, the Porsche GT3 is quick. I never thought that our GT4 was quick, but this is quick, really quick, and you know, between 6,000 and 9,000 revs, it absolutely flies. However, it's just not in the same league as the 675. Now, to an extent, the unladen weight of the Porsche is probably about 1410 kilograms, whereas on the McLaren it's 1230 before fluids and people and the rest. But on top of that, you have an extra 175 HP in the McLaren, so clearly there's a difference, going to be a difference performance, but it's really, really marked. The McLaren simply flies. The Porsche is very fast. That's how I'd describe the difference. And I think the supercar is the one that just seems to bend physics and take you down the road so fast that you notice the difference. And also the sound of the McLaren at full chat is not as dramatic as the naturally aspirated Porsche, but the way that it clicks into gear with a huge bang, it's just, it sort of lends that sort of supercar image, the sort of image you expect to get from the supercar. It cracks. I mean, obviously it pops and bangs when you're rolling around and going quite quickly, but it's when the gears change in the McLaren, they just make the most extraordinary noise. Now, having said that, the gearbox on the Porsche GT3, the PDK, I think is even faster than on the McLaren. I've never come across a gearbox that shifts gears so quickly. I think there's more drama with the 675, but I just think that there's no time lost at all in the Porsche. It's just the most phenomenal gearbox, and it's perfectly suited to the car. Now, the other thing that the GT3 has, which the McLaren doesn't, although arguably with a car this size, I'm not sure what sort of difference it makes, is the Porsche has rear wheel steer. Okay, so the wheels turn at the back to the opposite way as they do to the front when you're maneuvering, because you can turn almost on a sixpence in this, but at high speed they turn the same way for additional stability, and you sort of notice it, though I think I don't have it on the Panamera, which you can possibly see in the background, but I think the Panamera would benefit from it. At the time that I spec'd the Panamera, I wasn't sure, so I didn't go for it, and with the benefit of hindsight, I wished I had. But at speed, this is an immensely stable car. But the only thing that I would say is part of that, I think, has to be down to the rear wing, because it has a big rear wing which is providing quite a lot of downforce. And as you probably are aware, in the Series 2 GT3 991, it was lifted up and further back. Apparently that provides an extra level of downforce that was absent in the previous car, though having driven the previous car you'd never think that lacked downforce. In the McLaren though, we have the active rear wing, and basically I've got it in the up mode, but obviously if you're travelling at speed you'd want it flat, but this provides decent downforce, perhaps not to the same level as the GT3, but also it provides additional braking power. So when you're decelerating hard, this comes right out and goes almost vertical to provide as much braking as you can possibly give it. And I think the brakes are better on the McLaren than they are on the GT3, but I will say that on the GT3 I don't have the carbon ceramics, whereas I do have carbon ceramics on the McLaren, so it's possibly not comparing like for like. Not necessarily just down to supercars, but also down to McLaren themselves, because McLaren are quite fastidious in the detail that they go to with their engineering on cars, but also the time and effort that's spent on just making individual elements of the car look beautiful. I think personally the way that this wing mirror has integrated indicator, plus it has a carbon fibre arm, I think is just beautiful. I think it's an absolute work of art. Obviously you couldn't say the same of the Porsche, because of course they make many more of the 911s, and as a consequence it has to fit on all, whereas I think here, and the price points are completely different, which we'll talk about in a second. But I think everything about it is slightly more dramatic. If I open the dihedral doors, you can see that just sort of lends a dramatic element to the car. And I think if you look inside, you can see quite clearly that we've got the carbon tub, and the floor is completely carbon, and as a consequence of that, there's just a massive amount of high quality materials in this car that you simply couldn't manufacture at the price point of the GT3. And I personally love the interior of the 675 LT, far prefer it to both the 570S and the 720S, just because I think it's more dramatic. I think that those other cars referred to, they're more practical in some ways, because of course they're electronic screens and you can configure them pretty much the way you want, whereas here you can't. Central rev counter and then 2 digital dials on each side, but they have pretty fixed information on them. And then again you can see the carbon tub. In later McLarens, the one thing that they have done is they've lowered the tub with their fibre chassis too. So you don't have to lift your legs so high over the lip here to get into the car. And of course, because they're racing seats, you know, you sort of fall into them when you get there, but you get used to it. Even down to the carbon fibre wheel arch at the front of the car. It's just a piece of attention to detail that it's covered up most of the time. It's only the owners and their passengers that are going to see it when they have the door open like this. And I just think that's dramatic. Now you come round to the Porsche. Of course, I rate the Porsche interior. I think it's a very special interior, but it's standard across the 911 range. And as a consequence of that, you see a lot of them. See a lot of these type of interiors. Every 911 has an interior that can be spec'd very similar to this one. I particularly like the sports racing seats, because I don't have a roll cage in the back. You just push the seats forward, and of course that, if you pull them forward as well, it gives you easily able to put quite large suitcases in the rear. And I love, look at that. I mean, that's a work of art. And I actually think the seats in the Porsche look even better than in the McLaren. So it's a good working place, but it's perhaps not as individual and exciting to be in as the McLaren. We didn't opt for a roll cage in the Porsche, but the reason we didn't opt for the roll cage was we have the Club Sport version of the 675, and it has a titanium roll cage in the back which weighs only 5 kg, so there's really no weight penalty that you're going to notice anyway in terms of putting that in. And I think this is more the lightweight track car, although having driven this, I'd say, having driven this on the track and driven the GT3 on the track, I have to be honest with you and say the GT3 is a little more manageable than the McLaren. I think part of that is actually another supercar trait, which is supercars are generally quite difficult to see out of and quite intimidating when you drive. Whereas the thing about the 911, what I absolutely love, it's not too big, you have excellent visibility absolutely everywhere, except if trying to spot the police car behind, because the rear wing tends to cut out anything in the rear view mirror at a point. Other than that, the visibility generally is just top rate in the GT3. In the McLaren, it's excellent going forward. So if I can show you how deep this windscreen is compared to the Porsche, it really comes forward, and you really can see the dimensions of the car on the McLaren when you're sitting forward, but you're still sitting in a very low position, and it's a slightly strange but very comfortable position that they have the bucket seat set at. So you sort of takes a little getting used to, and it can be a little intimidating in the early stages. However, from the back, especially with the wing up, you can't see a thing except through the door mirrors. With the wing downs, not too bad, but obviously the screen on the 675 LT is perspex, so it slightly distorts the view. So I think if buying something that is going to be an absolute occasion to drive every time you take it out is the supercar, and the sports car is more what you can use on an everyday basis. I think there is a big difference between the two. I use the McLaren more sparingly, but when I use it, it's about the most exciting thing I've driven. I have driven the 720S, although not in anger. It's also very exciting to sit in and drive because it's the same basic principles as the 675 LT. The Porsche, really, I've done many more miles in the Porsche than I have in my everyday car. Of course, is the Panamera, but I would take the GT3 out really regularly, and I do some town trips in the GT3. Whereas I've never had the 675 LT in town, because I think it would be incredibly intimidating to sit in traffic in, because you can't see anything. And one of the things about driving in all towns, but London in particular, is you get if you're going in first thing in the morning, you get swarms of bikes coming around you, both motor but also pedal bikes, and you have to see everywhere not to end up taking a manoeuvre that takes out 3 bicyclists. So I think the McLaren very much is the sort of car that is for fun, for taking to Goodwood, for all sorts of other, to going to Blenheim Palace, exhibiting at some of these events. The Porsche I use when I want to just go out and enjoy myself. Because you can just jump in the Porsche and you're away. You don't have to. It's no different really. I mean, obviously, it's more dramatic than the Panamera, but it offers a lot of the benefits of a larger car and a non-sports car in terms of its total visibility. I think it's just a fantastic car. So they are very different overall, the cars, but I don't have a favourite. I like them equally. I think the McLaren is the more dramatic of the two, but again they're at a different price point. The list on the GT3 was £112,000. The list on this was £260,000. So the manufacturers are building different cars to at that level. So it's very difficult to compare them. Do I get the same thrills out of the GT3? Not quite, but I'd say it's 90% of the thrills that you get out of the McLaren, and you're paying less than half the price. I mean, I think the GT3 is an exceptional car. And then the one thing that I will leave you with that the GT3 has that is very difficult not to put at the top of your list is naturally aspirated engine. It's a dying breed because the emissions are going to require everybody to have probably 6-cylinder turbos for both or hybrid and technology for the next generation. And I just think that, you know, these cars are to be enjoyed, and 9,000 revs in the Porsche is really, you cannot experience the noise and the vibrations you get through the steering wheel from a turbo car. All right, guys. Well, I hope I didn't ramble on too long there, and thoroughly enjoyed both of them. I thought about replacing them, but right this minute in time, I'm very happy with the cars that I have in the collection. So maybe add to it might be my thought process, but we'll see. Thanks for watching, guys. Ian from SS8000 Cars signing off.